Should children be arrested for not doing their homework? What about running away? In mid-May, a 15-year-old African-American girl known as Grace was sentenced by a Michigan judge to a locked residential facility where she's unable to see her mom and may remain until at least September. The judge claims it's for her own good and will help her in life. Advocates claim it's abuse, unjust, and racist. Survivors and advocates know jail seldom helps a child. Shackles and handcuffs degrade, not heal. Free Grace. Yet 728,200 children were arrested in America in 2018. That includes 260 children arrested for prostitution or solicitation. That is 260 child victims of child sex trafficking or commercial sexual exploitation. That number does not include the thousands of children arrested for other things like status offenses, such as running away. In 2012, 790 children were arrested for prostitution. That was the same year that a 17-year-old child named Tiffany Simpson was arrested herself for sex trafficking. Only she was a victim, just like the 790 other children who were arrested. Now serving a 20-year sentence, Tiffany is seeking her freedom. Karana Rising has dedicated this World Day to end trafficking in persons to Tiffany Simpson. It's time we take a hard look at the devastating consequences of arresting girls and what happens when systems and communities fail their most vulnerable. From jail, Tiffany writes, "I was 16 when my trafficker lured me into this hell. He used my hurt to his profit. Like a lot of girls, I was just wanting love. My mom, who I love, was struggling with alcoholism and was really in a dark place. My dad was arrested when I was 6. I actually saw it on the news. He's now in prison for life. This really hurts me. Human trafficking is kind of like the coronavirus to me. If you don't try to find out where it's happening, it just spreads. For most girls like me, the infection starts with not feeling loved or safe at home. Yet it can happen to anyone, but girls out there on their own are especially vulnerable." If you care about Tiffany and about the rights of trafficking survivors like her, please help us out by making a sign #FreeTiffanySimpson at We Are Karana Rising and send it to our Instagram account or post it below in the comments for this YouTube video. Thank you. After the show, please click on the link in the comments to sign our new petition, Free Child Sex Trafficking Survivor Tiffany Simpson. It is dedicated to the entire state of Georgia that failed her, and we are urgently trying to seek her release. Thank you so much, and now for the show. Hi, everyone. This is Andrea Powell with Surviving Now, a production of Karana Rising. This is episode 12, Free Them All. This is a very special episode for us as we're talking about something that so many survivors and advocates hold dear to their heart, but not that many people out in the public know a lot about. And that's the fact that even child victims of commercial sexual exploitation and sex trafficking continue to be arrested here in this country. And so we're going to talk today about the root of those issues, as well as some of the changes, innovations that we're seeing across this country. So I am very happy to be joined by Elizabeth Scaife, who is a longtime friend and advocate in the field and just all around guru who knows so much about this topic. Elizabeth, take a moment to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. It's an honor and a privilege to be here with Andrea again. We are old partners in crime as far as fighting trafficking goes. I have been in this field for over 11 years now, entirely the whole time working here in Washington, D.C. alongside Andrea and some of our other national stakeholders. Most of my expertise has been focused on training, awareness, policy initiatives, and then more recently capacity building and strategic planning for international organizations. But the first 9 years in the field, I worked for an organization that focused entirely on domestic minor victims. So it is exciting for me to be here. Thanks for asking me to join.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for making the time. And we're also joined by Ashley Lowe, who is also a longtime friend and advocate and survivor. Ashley, if you want to take a moment to introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ashley. I'm a survivor of human trafficking. Also, I'm with Karana Rising. I'm a lab associate and designer. And that's me. Thank you for allowing me to be here.
Ashley, it's always a pleasure to have you. So I wanted to kick off the conversation with a little bit of background as to why now, like why are we having this conversation now? Because as you'll learn in this episode, sadly, this issue's been going on for a very long time. And so what really sparked our interest is there's a recent case in the last 2 months of a young woman, a young girl, actually 15 years old in Michigan, who is currently sitting in a locked residential facility. So it's not the same as being in jail or detention, and we'll talk about those distinctions, but nonetheless, she can't leave. The initial charges that she faced were a bit more serious, assault and larceny, but she struggles with a number of disabilities, including ADHD. And during the course of her case, she was arrested for not doing her homework. Well, she was at school, but doing it virtually, and effectively just kind of lost her ability to continue. And so the judge sentenced her to a locked residential facility. And there's a huge national outcry for free grace. And so we started to think about the fact that it's great that people are having that national outcry, and it's added to the national conversation around the mass incarceration of people of color. But I think what's often been missing in that conversation is what's happening to girls. What is happening to girls in jail? Who are these girls? Where are they coming from? And what are their experiences? And really, I think ultimately, more importantly, how do we look at this issue without not looking at the root causes that lead so many kids into a situation where they're incarcerated? In fact, in 2018, just for the issue of curfew and loitering, the charge of curfew and loitering, there's 22,030 kids arrested just for that charge. And we'll speak a little bit more about why that's so important. But not only are trafficked kids being arrested, but when kids enter these detention facilities or locked residential facilities, that often also puts them at risk toward future exploitation and trafficking. Elizabeth, I wanted to ask you kind of a bigger question, but what are some of the changes that you've seen nationally in the last 10 years in how child victims of CSEC, commercial sexual exploitation, or sex trafficking are viewed by the court?
It's actually a great question. Honestly, because I've been in the field for over a decade, I've had the unique experience of seeing where we went from no training, very few resources, low level of awareness, and high level of criminalization for victims, right, over to where we are now. And although it's been a decade, I have seen, I would say, tremendous growth, change, new research, new policies, new initiatives, new best practices emerging throughout the justice system, especially in the courts. And some of that is as simple as new labels, right? So you going from the criminalization style labels all the way over to a more victim-centered approach. But that paradigm shift also involves training for juvenile and family court judges, and then the establishment of specialized courts. So I think it was way back in 2013 when there was a call, sort of an international call by international leaders in this issue, to change our practices within the court system and redirect juveniles from juvenile justice into services. And so states here in the US started to respond, and including sort of the birth of what we consider a specialized court system, or a specialized court in general. And those courts are present in a few different areas. They're not as popular as we wish they were, but they're becoming more popular as they begin to learn how to tackle the issue in a trauma-informed and strengths-based way. These specialized courts, and there is one here in DC, and Andrea is very familiar with it, that specializes in working with these youth. And so youth who are identified as high risk or identified as victims are diverted into this court system, and the entire environment from the beginning to the end of the process is set up very differently. And these courts, and I would say the juvenile family court system in general, recognizes that sexual trauma related to sexual abuse, exploitation, and trafficking is a leading cause of behavioral issues with youth these days, and a leading cause of their intersection with the justice and delinquency system. And in an effort to respond to that, there are policy changes at the state and national level, and there are the establishment or this effort to divert youth into services and away from the delinquency system. And so through those courts, they can receive specialized services. They may receive a mentor, a case manager who has a trauma-informed and is ready and available to help with the wraparound services and support for that child to get them through the program effectively. And the court focuses, which I think is really important, just the last point, on self-determination and self-empowerment. It's not just that the court is directing them through it, it's that the youth is a substantial part of the process in goal setting and working towards those goals, which we know creates sustainability in their healing process.
And I think that's so key, that sustainability point. That really resonates with me. As you know, I've been a part of one of the specialized courts development in the District of Columbia, and that empowerment piece is so critical. I mean, I've seen kids look totally surprised when the judge gets off the bench and actually goes and sits with them and talks with them, and usually they look like, but they start to see like we're actually here collectively as stakeholders to help. And it really speaks to my heart because, as you know, right now, Karana Rising is working to help gain clemency for a young woman named Tiffany Simpson. And just a little background on Tiffany, because we're going to be bringing her up throughout the course of the conversation. Tiffany really had a very rough childhood, starting with dealing with her mom, who was struggling with alcohol, watching her dad get arrested on TV for murder when she was 6, being in and out of the system and bounced from house to house. And so by the time she was 16, she was trying to survive on her own on the streets. And so all these systems saw Tiffany, the child welfare system, the juvenile justice system, schools, people in the community, other adults. And so that misidentification of just kind of cycling her in and out of these systems ultimately led to her trying to survive on her own. And that's how she ended up getting sucked into a sex trafficking situation with what I would consider to be one of the more violent sex traffickers I've ever heard of, had a history of arsonry. When Tiffany was arrested as a child victim of sex trafficking, she had multiple stab wounds and was pregnant. And unfortunately, when her trafficker trafficked another young girl, as you know, Tiffany was arrested as well and is now serving 20 years. And so, Tiffany, we are determined to get her out, and she is a part of our team now and does amazing advocacy from the behind the walls that she should never be in. But the reality, and what really strikes me the most, is that it did not have to get to this point. And that's similar to cases like Centoya Brown or Alexis Martin and so many other young children who were arrested and charged with unbelievably long sentences. But, starting out, looking at this issue as, what are the vulnerabilities that lead kids down this path and ultimately result in trafficking? And so I wanted to ask Ashley, what made you vulnerable towards sex trafficking when you were younger?
Honestly, my story kind of relates to Tiffany a lot, as far as, I mean, when you deep digger down into like survivors and young survivors, it's always, it falls into the same category as Elizabeth was kind of saying, like, it's repetitive. Not only that, it like, okay, I know this probably don't make sense, but like it's a pattern. Like every girl, men, boys too, it's something was always broken in the home, whether it was a absent parent, whether it was drugs, whether they weren't feeling love. What made me subjected to, honestly, was like the same. My mom was on drugs at a point in time in her life. My dad was never around. Then I started, I wasn't feeling love at home, and then I started running away. And then in the process of me running away, trying to survive on my own, that's when I met my trafficker at 13.
And I think that's so important to understand. There's something broken in the home. People talk about kids being runaways, and charges like abscondence or truancy or curfew are a big component to risks and red flags when you're looking at who might potentially be in a trafficking situation. But people often use that term runaway, and what I often think is more accurate is push away. These are not kids who are like, I think it'll be really fun to sleep at a bus stop. Like, that's not often what's going on. That world out there is really rough. And I think law enforcement is one entry point, and people often really focus on law enforcement and training law enforcement and victim identification, but it's also important for the broader public, teachers, community members, and others to understand just how complex this is. So we're very lucky. We're in the District of Columbia, and we're one of those jurisdictions with a robust court program. We have services available ranging from youth shelters to trafficking survivor shelters. There's a lot of advocacy here, and yet we still struggle to fill the need. But I wanted to pose a scenario, Elizabeth, because I want to speak to the complexity of why maybe law enforcement would have good intentions and still think that like arrest and incarceration is the only option. So I have a scenario. You have a 14-year-old girl who's identified by law enforcement as a child victim of sex trafficking. Her pimp poses as her boyfriend, and she believes that he loves her. She's picked up on a status offense, which is the most common offense for kids. And so that's like not going to court, not following through on, say, doing your homework, just as an example. So the next thing you know, the law enforcement is trying to decide, do I let her go back out into the community, go back home where she's absolutely going to run back to this person who she believes loves her, or do I lock her up? You know, what should that law enforcement officer be thinking, and how complex is that?
Ooh, that's a big question, as you know, which is why you're asking it. The truth is, in a well-resourced area, what would typically happen is if the child was picked up, if the law enforcement takes the child into custody, they have to take the child into custody for a reason, right? That's just kind of the role. And so if it's curfew, if it's loitering, if it's running away, if it's truancy, if it's an outstanding warrant of some kind, whatever, they take the child into custody for some reason per se, right? And if their system is set up as sort of a well-oiled machine when it comes to serving victims, then that child will be properly assessed by a trained professional, and they'll be routed into services like wraparound services that support their needs as a victim if they're identified as high risk or an actual victim, right? Their home environment would be assessed. There would be support for the family. They would be placed back home, or they would be placed in a facility or environment that was appropriate to their needs as a status as a victim, right? The charges would be dropped as soon as the child was placed somewhere. I mean, this is an ideal world, and that placement would be in a specialized environment, safe environment, and their treatment would be monitored. Okay, that's ideal. But when you're in a community where there are very few resources, there's very little training, there's low levels of awareness, there's just enough for the officer to recognize that perhaps this child could be a victim or is involved in prostitution related or sexually exploited related activity, right? But there are no resources. Then the law enforcement officer wants to keep the child safe. They believe they have no other option, so they charge the child and they dump them into sort of the delinquency or detention system, whether it's for 15 or 30 days, right? They view that as their only option for keeping the child safe. And that's happened here in Virginia. You know, Virginia has a human trafficking task force, but without the ability to coordinate, right, effectively with child welfare, without the appropriate policies in place that support child welfare's involvement with this child, right? If the family is not the one involved in trafficking, then the policies have to change for child welfare to be involved in the case of a child like this. And so it just becomes an explosively complex situation. So their effort is to keep the child safe, and they may put them in the detention system, but just like Ashley said, it institutes this psychological cycle for the victim, right? They're being criminalized for their status as a victim. So when you try to come back and tell the child they're a victim at any point, they're going to say, but you criminalized me. And that creates its own trauma itself. So there are no other options. And in detention, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, the services are slim to none, if any, right? And so it's just meant to be a safe place to prevent them from running away or being on the street, but it doesn't solve the problem. You're just treating this deep wound with a Band-Aid that only addresses what's happening on the surface, right? It's not actually getting to the root of the issue. And so, yeah.
Well, and as a service provider who has attempted to enter detention facilities to visit my clients, I have to say, it can take hours to get in there, and then you have 30 minutes, and then everything you do is being observed, and they're wearing, I want to paint a visual, you know, you have a child who's maybe being drugged, you know, to keep them calm, and so they're loopy, they're out of it, they're wearing, you know, the you know, state or district issued garb that you wear in there, and you know, they're really, it's really demoralizing. And you know, I think to just focus, because this is where the conversation was striking me recently, to just focus on like law enforcement should not be involved or defund the police, like all of those are important conversations, but when you're talking about addressing the arrest of children who are at risk or experiencing trafficking, it's just not as simplistic as attacking one system. It has to be a coordinated response across a spectrum. And Ashley, I wanted to ask you, when you were first arrested and charged, what was that like for you? What did you feel like? What message did that send young you?
I mean, honestly, it was kind of getting frustrating just talking about all this, because like, I mean, Elizabeth, you're absolutely on point. Like when I was 13, I got charged with prostitution at 13 years old, and got locked up. When I went to court, I ended up getting committed from 13 to 18 through DUI arrest. You know what I mean? Like, and instead of there was no services like, okay, well, you need to talk to this person, nothing. It was just a label. You know what I mean? And being 13, I mean, I'm still a baby for real. Like I ain't never been through nothing like that before. You know what I mean? And then how it was set up, it was a sting. It was just, I mean, it was scary, honestly. You know what I mean? Like, and just like, I didn't feel like I was treated as if a child. I kind of felt like I was treated as an adult. Like honestly, like like. Look, this is what it is. This is what's about to happen. Y'all about to go. You know what I mean? It was just wild. Like it honestly was. That's why I say, Elizabeth, honestly, it was getting a little frustrating because everything you were saying was on point. Like, like it's crazy. Like, I mean, I hope, I mean, 13 was a long time ago. I'm about to be 26. So, like, a lot of things have changed during that time. You know what I mean? But it honestly I feel like it wasn't fair, but also I didn't understand that I was a victim either. This is just what it is. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, I'm not going to sit here and act like I didn't know what I was doing, but I also was being brainwashed and vulnerable at the same time. So, I mean, but I felt like it was horrible, honestly. And then to be at 13 charged with prostitution and committed, and then that, my mama had no say so where I went. DUI arrest determined where I was going and where I'm going and things like that, It was kind of unfair, honestly. Now that I'm older and I think back at it.
Yeah, I think that those are really good points, Ashley. And I remember meeting you when you were just exiting the youth detention facility, and I would venture to say that you still hadn't viewed yourself with compassion at that point. And there's been this amazing transformation, because as an advocate, I'm looking in, or as an adult, I'm looking in saying this shouldn't be happening to you, but you had an entire court system say that it should. And so that can be very confusing for a child. And I think that's like this key point is there's a lot of attitude about, well, you've made these choices or you've made these bad decisions. And so there's this punishment model. And when we're talking about kids, you're almost fulfilling this cycle where the kid starts to think, well, if the court thinks I'm so bad, if everyone thinks I'm so bad, what incentive do I have to do something better? And so that loop goes further and further down. And I wanted Elizabeth to kind of highlight something with you. I know with Tiffany, who I'm going to keep circling back to, there were so many opportunities for intervention, and these things, it's like a slippery slope. I often say, sex trafficking or sexual exploitation, it's like the bad icing on an already really bad cake. And so I wanted to ask you, because you know this almost better than anyone else, but it's not just about, the 260 kids in 2018 who were arrested for solicitation and prostitution. What are other charges? What are other things that people should be looking for to understand how we unravel the number of at-risk and exploited kids being incarcerated in this country?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the most obvious offenses that we can recognize as directly related to trafficking are prostitution related offenses. I've even seen minors arrested, as Tiffany was, for exploiting or trafficking other minors, right? And that is the red flag of all red flags right there. But it's all the other sort of more gray area diluted offenses that are super common, because those aren't nearly as common as truancy, curfew violations, running away, loitering, theft, trespassing, minor drug possession or attempting to sell drugs, weapons possessions, especially at school, gang involvement, having a fake ID, fighting and assault, vandalism, underage drinking. I mean, the list goes on, right, of reasons that kids can get arrested or picked up on low-level status offenses. And those youth are at high danger of constantly intersecting with the justice system, because they'll loop through the system, the delinquency system. They won't be identified as a victim. They won't be screened appropriately. They'll do their time. They'll get out. They'll continue the activity, they'll get picked up again, and now they have a history of delinquency. And so they're viewed differently, right? And the cycle goes on.
And that's something that a couple of points I want to make to that, because you're right on. And that is, one thing that I learned in the district, and of course, different states have different policies, but if you were a part of the juvenile justice system and you ran away, for example, you were considered a fugitive. So there was no fancy, poster. There was no search. Nobody's really looking for you. If you get stumbled upon and they find you, then you get rearrested. Well, guess what? Kids who were trying to survive on their own know that. So what do? They hide. And so, as I would if I were in that position. And so you have more and more kids who are pushed further and further underground through these punitive policies around these charges. And actually, there was a 2017 report between 2007 and 2016 in DC. There was an 87% increase in the arrest of girls. And the vast majority were girls of color, I think something like 80%. And whilst I totally hear someone in the background watching this video saying, oh, well, DC has got a large African-American population. But no, the inconvenient fact in response to that is only 49% of kids in the district are kids who are African-American. So there is a disparity and there is a lot going on there. And one thing that I wanted to note with Tiffany's case is that she herself is Caucasian, but her trafficker was African-American. And when I called the sheriff's office in Atlanta, or outside of Atlanta, when I first understood what had happened to her, I called like very naively, this was years ago, like, hey, so it seems you accidentally arrested a child sex trafficking victim. Oops. And their response was, well, that's what she gets for messing around with that N-word. And so, of course, it's like, I see we're not going to be aligned. I'll just hang up. But it just really highlights the fact that there's so many components to this and so many different things going on. Ashley, you and I have known each other for a really long time. And so I'm going to ask a very honest question, but why, what do you think could have been done instead for you at that age? Like, what should have happened that would have actually helped you prevent future exploitation? Because I know that first time was not the first time you were exploited.
I mean, honestly, I just kind of feel like there was more resources. Like, it took for me to get locked up several of times, and like you said, it wasn't, oh, like you said, missing posters, you was a fugitive, but mine's always my custody orders and things like that always been from running, away and things like that. But there, like I said, like when I got locked up, there wasn't a lot of resources. I met you guys when I was 17. I got committed when I was 13. Do you understand what I'm saying? So I kind of had to go through the the juvenile process, group homes, residentials, and you know what I'm saying, things in that nature. Honestly, it wasn't like you go to these places and you go to group homes and you go to placements and things like that. There's not really a topic of conversation as far as human trafficking and things like that, or what it is or what it's not. It's like, oh, you got behavior problems, you know what I'm saying, or you in here for fighting, or you know what I mean, and things in that nature. Like nothing was really touched up or brushed up on the issue from what my issue was. You understand what I'm saying? So like I just kind of wish that there were more resources and more people to talk to that understand, what human trafficking is. Like, what is it about? You understand what I'm saying? Not just, oh, you're a hoe, or you know what I mean? Like you're a prostitute. Like that's how they looked at me. Honestly, I felt like, at 13 and being in that system, like, oh, okay, well, she out here, she a hoe, you know what I mean? Things like that. It wasn't looking like, well, damn, like she's a victim. Excuse my language, but like she's a victim, like. Like it wasn't none of that. And honestly, it took me a long time to understand that I was a victim. You know what I mean? And like to touch up on what you, Elizabeth, and Andrea said, like, once, like they're looking at me like I'm this and I'm that. So why not keep it going? Like, why not have the same behavior? Like, okay, don't nobody care about me. And honestly, somebody really got into the deeper core of what the issue was with that person, they'll know. Well, like, well, dang, like she's telling me she's never felt this growing up and things like that. And I'm not saying they're saying baby nobody, but you know what I mean? Make them feel like you understand.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And that's something that Ashley, I'm going to double rainbow and ask you another question and follow up. But I wanted to ask you, when you were in these group homes, oftentimes people on the outside looking in think of, oh, it's a shelter, it's a safe space, these foster group homes, like, oh, it's better than jail and it is better than jail in a lot of ways. But what were you seeing in there? Did you actually experience or see that being there, that there were other kids who were going through what you were going through?
Yeah, but ain't no, you know, I'm gonna be honest, and I'm being so honest, and I can only speak for my time when I was there. You understand what I'm saying? It was even embarrassing. You know, people ask, what you in here for? What you do? You know what I mean? I'm supposed to tell them at 13 I'm in here for prostitution. Like, that don't look good. You know what I mean? And then, you know, like, it's just, I don't know. There was some of us that have experienced the same things, but it was just between me and that person. You know what I mean? Like, I ain't gonna say nothing, you don't say nothing. And we just kept it to ourselves because we felt like if we got exposed, we looked down upon. You know what I mean? Even some staff be acting shady, like, you know, like, you know, things like that. But I mean, you had some good ones that, you know, wanted to know what's up with you, know how you're feeling, you know what I mean? Like, really want to know what's up with you, you know what I mean? But I mean, yeah, honestly, in my time, though, it was other youth like me, but it was very secretive, very compact, you know what I mean? Like, everybody didn't want everybody else to know everybody else's business. And it was kind of sad a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what my experience has been, is going into those facilities, and seeing just how complex and how scary it can be. I actually went into a foster group home to talk to staff and educate kids about trafficking. This was years and years ago. And while we were sitting there talking to these kids about trafficking, one of the employees, and you're right, there are many great ones, but this one particular woman who was a case manager, i.e. a social worker, made a hat and put the word pimp on it and walked around saying, I tell y'all what to do. I tell y'all what to eat. I tell you when to go to bed. I'm your pimp. And I was just like, you're unhelpful. So I'm going to need you to leave so that I can do this workshop without you. But I made a report, and the response was, it was just a joke. And so, and of course, I was never allowed back to that foster group home because I spoke about it. So that just shows like how far we have to go. I mean, again, that was some time ago. Elizabeth, I'm going to ask a very direct question for you to unpack, but what is safe harbor? What is a safe harbor law, and is it enough to unravel what we're looking at in terms of at-risk kids and kids who are being trafficked continuing to be arrested?
Okay, good question. So safe harbor has kind of become a catch-all term that implies certain things and does encompass certain things, right? But at a state level, it can be, I mean, my gosh, it can be like a shade of, like what we say, I describe this color as red. Well, red can encompass a variety of shades, right? Or hues, and so does safe harbor. Safe harbor has some basic tenets, but looks different in every single state. You know, states are seeing other states employ safe harbor principles, and they'll saying, okay, let's create our own version of it. We'll call it safe harbor. But safe harbor is not one size shoe fits all in every state. It basically refers to policies and practices that are put in place at the state level that are meant to improve the response to victims within the justice system or the delinquency system. So for example, it typically refers to decriminalizing prostitution for minors. So offering some form of immunity to minors for being involved in prostitution related offenses. Like it also includes a diversion aspect. So diverting minors from the delinquency into mandatory programs. Once they complete the program, their charges are dropped. Or also direct referral to services. And so no delinquency proceeding, just directly into services, specialized services for those who are identified as victims. And then oftentimes it can involve reclassifying victims once they're discovered. So maybe they've already gone through delinquency proceedings and then they're identified as a victim later. And so they can be reclassified. Maybe their charges will be dropped. Their records can be sealed or expunged or whatnot. And so safe harbor can include most or all of these tenets, but the variations are extremely important, which is why there are organizations like Shared Hope who has an in-depth policy analysis, and they don't use the term safe harbor because it's different in every state. They use the term protective provisions, right? And they're encouraging every state to adopt the same protective provisions for this reason. So some differences, just to add a little to this, flavor. So as far as immunity goes, we would naturally, those of who are advocates and survivors and allies in this field, we would naturally think, okay, if you're immune as a minor, anyone under 18 is a minor. Therefore, anyone under 18 is immune to prosecution for prostitution offenses. Not true, because in some states that started introducing safe harbor, they put their limit at 16, anyone under 16. But if you're 17 years of age, you really know what you're doing at that point. So if you're involved in prostitution, you're not really a victim, you're almost an adult, and we're gonna consider you that and treat you as one, right? And so those of us in this field find that enraging because it doesn't make any sense. Like, we all know that that's not actually true at all. Your brain is not even fully functioning until you're in your upper 20s. I mean, there's just so many nuances to this issue, okay? But then there are some states that have diversion programs, and the child has to complete the mandatory requirements within the diversion program in order for the charges to be dropped. Well, we know, working with this population, that trauma is extremely high, especially developmental trauma, that resources are few, that perhaps their home life or their specialized services or their placement is not supportive enough to help them get through meeting the goals of the program. They may abscond, they may run away, they may drop out, and the program is unforgiving. Perhaps that placement won't take you. If you run away once, they won't take you back. What happens now? Can you complete the requirements of the program? So you see what I'm saying? There are too many gaps in the provision or requirements around safe harbor laws. And so it's not enough. This is back to your original question, Andrea, whether safe harbor policies are enough. No, they're never enough. Policy as a standalone component will never solve the issue that we're dealing with minors. What solves the issue is a multidisciplinary, collaborative community approach between professionals, survivors, allies, law enforcement, child welfare, juvenile justice, CP. I mean, everybody's got to be at the table for creating a model that supports this path that's not a linear approach that this young person takes to healing, right? That involves relapse, that involves grace, that involves support through every step of the process. And so it's not just about policy, it's also more critically about practice.
And that is a beautiful response. And I just wrote the word grace down as you were talking, because that is what everyone needs, but particularly a child who's experienced all the trauma and the failings that they face that would lead them to being at risk or experiencing sexual exploitation or trafficking. And, you know, and the idea of like almost an adult. I was actually at a Maryland State assembly hearing, testifying along with another survivor, a colleague of mine at Karana Rising. And one of the legislators actually said, well, if you're 16, 17, you're almost an adult. And I wanted to say, that doesn't make any sense. Like that's like saying that banana is almost a banana. It is or it is not a banana. And so this person can't be an almost adult. It's a child. And then when they turn 18, they become an adult. That does not mean services should stop. I still care deeply. I don't care if you're 12 or 72, but when we're talking about kids, there's so many other compounding traumas and risks. I mean, if you're 13, you can't actually get a legit job. If you can't go home and you're not safe or you're not feeling loved there and you decide to try to make it on your own, your only real recourse is the street economy, if that's what you're going, down that path to do. And I wanted to think about, again, circling back to Tiffany's situation and how many different systems touched upon her. And it reminds me of when I first got started in the field. And so I was very naive, and I would do ridiculous things like write these very long letters to judges about why my client arrested on truancy should be released. And initially there was one judge, Judge Piglugo, and every time he'd see me walk in the courtroom, I could see it in his eyes. He's like, oh my gosh, there she is. To the point that he would just see me and he'd be like, catch and release, leave me alone. But then it changed, right? I mean, you were there for that. It changed where we started to have these very complicated monthly meetings to talk about, well, how are we going to respond? And then when Judge Piglugo stepped down, we had a new judge step in the District of Columbia, Judge Rook, and she rose to the challenge of setting up what is now our Hope Court program. And we visited a number of other Hope Court programs. So I naively, pranced into that Maryland legislative meeting thinking, well, if they're talking about passing safe harbor, then they're talking about passing my version of safe harbor. Nope. That was not what happened. And so basically their safe harbor still allows for the arrest of minors for prostitution, which I'm like, that's a not at all safe harbor. That's not red, that's green. But it did allow for services. It did allow for some other pretty innovative strategies in providing services, which is very critical. And so it's true that these pieces of legislation, vary from place to place and state to state. Ashley, you actually have done some really amazing work with me, and one thing that stood out is I don't know if you remember when you wrote your testimony for Senator Gillibrand, and she shared your testimony and read it for you, because I would say you were still in the exploratory phase of whether or not you wanted to be more public about your experiences. And so part of that legislation, if you remember, was to define the issue of child trafficking as a form of child abuse.
Right.
Why do you think that's important?
Say that one more time.
Why do you think that defining child sex trafficking as a form of child abuse matters?
Because I mean, it's the same thing, like honestly, like I said before earlier when we were talking, like, it's a pattern, like, you know what I mean? Like if you ask a lot of people, like, okay, like their stories or, how they got into human trafficking, a lot of it has to do with parents missing, being sexually, touched, molested, raped, you know what I mean? Like it's to me, it's the same, like, and it's, I don't know. Am I answering your question right? No?
Yes, it's your answer, then it's right. So that's how
I feel like I was kind of a little bit all over the place.
No, I mean, well, I mean, this issue's all over the place, right? So that's fair. I wanted to ask you too, Ashley. We're starting down this advocacy road. We're launching a petition tomorrow in honor of the World Day to acknowledge human trafficking. We're starting a petition to free Tiffany Simpson, and I was sitting there making the petition early this morning and using some of the content that Tiffany had shared. Basically, as crazy as it is, we're the portal for her to get her voice out there right now because she can't speak publicly. And I was like, okay, who do I make this petition to? You go to change.org. They're like, who are you making it to? Is it the mayor? Is it this or that? And I finally decided I'm going to put it to the entire state of Georgia. Why? Because the entire state of Georgia, all these systems failed her. So it's time to own up to that and take action. In 2015, I believe it was when Georgia passed their version of safe harbor, which did protect children from the arrest of solicitation and prostitution. And so I'm thinking, to myself, like, okay, that was 2015. Tiffany was arrested in 2012. And so unfortunately she didn't make it in, but she wants to advocate. She wants to be a part of this movement. She wants to help other girls and kids. And she's starting on that journey from within those prison walls. But, what would you say, Ashley, to Tiffany as she's inevitably going to be released? I'm very optimistic. What is it like out here as an advocate in this space, as someone with lived experience?
Gonna love it. I mean, honestly, she's gonna love it. I mean, me, honestly, like, I ain't gonna lie, Andrea, when I first got involved with you guys, like, at first, like I said, I was a little scared, and I'm pretty sure she's gonna be a little nervous, you know what I mean? Especially now that she knows that her story kind of is getting exposed a little bit and out there, and then, you guys are doing the petition and things like that, these people are gonna wanna know, well, why? What has she been through that we should help her? You know what I mean? Especially if they give it that double look, which I feel like they need to grant her clemency. Reading her story myself, it's like, not that deep, but very, very, a lot of things are very, very similar. You understand what I'm saying? And I feel like that they need to go ahead and let her get that. But like I said, I mean, if anything, I think she will be nervous. I know I was, but honestly, it kind of got me out my comfort zone. Not only that, I kind of feel like, as you tell me all the time, that my voice is powerful and my heart really is with youth. Like, I'm not trying to be biased or nothing with men or nothing like that, but my heart is really for, like, youth females. You understand what I'm saying? And it don't necessarily got to be with human trafficking and things like that. It don't have to be, it could be anything. Domestic, drugs, maybe a little defiant in school and things like that. I don't know, but my heart is really in for the youth. And I kind of feel like, honestly, it kind of feels a little better, like somebody going through or that's been in your shoes. It kind of feel a little bit better knowing that the person you're talking to has been there and done that. And well, look, I was there, and you might feel like there's no hope and I can't do this and I can't do that, but look where I'm standing today. You understand what I'm saying? So like, it just gives them hope, like, gives the next person hope. Like, but honestly, I think that she's gonna love it. And so far, everything that in her little testimony, it's done touched me, and it was deep. And like I said, it just feels better from coming from somebody that's actually kind of been in your shoes a little bit. You know what I mean? But honestly, I think I'm gonna love it, and I feel like she's gonna be dope. But they need to definitely grant her clemency, and her story needs to be told.
Thank you, Ashley. And we're getting close to closing, and there's going to be other supplemental material. For those who are listening in or watching, stay tuned to see how you can sign our petition for Tiffany and learn more about her support. She also loves receiving letters and other, ability to connect with the outside world. So we started this conversation talking about a young girl who's, I think it's her alias, Grace, who's in Michigan, 15, and locked up for not doing her homework. That sounds so simple, right? Like, let her go. It sounds so simple, like what a crazy offense. And yet the complexities of all of these cases are rooted in a lot of challenges for communities to ensure that we stop using jail as therapy. We stop using jail as a safe house, and we start to realize we can actually do better. And a lot of communities are starting to do that. And so that was the focus of this show, and in honor of UN, the World Day to End Trafficking. We are putting our emphasis on Tiffany, but we know that there are hundreds and thousands of Tiffany's out there. Ashley, thank you for being a part of the show. I always love working with you. And Elizabeth, it was good to see you, friend and ally. I keep thinking of the good old days of training law enforcement together, of being good advocate and bad advocate in the room to get their attention. But thank you both so much. And for those listening, stay tuned, and let's get Tiffany out of there. All right, signing out from Karana Rising, Surviving Now, episode 12, Free Them All.